It was a typical Tuesday morning at Atlanta's busiest airport. The sun was just starting to peek through the terminal windows as passengers hurried to catch their early flights. Gate 24 was buzzing with activity as Flight 447 prepared for its journey to Los Angeles. Linda Harper had been working as a flight attendant for 15 years. She knew this route like the back of her hand. Atlanta to LA, 3 times a week, same routine every time. At 42, she considered herself experienced, professional, and good at reading people. Or so she thought. Linda was having one of those mornings where everything seemed slightly off. Her coffee had gone cold, she'd argued with her teenage daughter before leaving home, and the traffic had been terrible. She was running on autopilot, going through her pre-flight checklist with mechanical precision. As she walked through the first-class cabin, checking seatbelts and overhead compartments, she noticed someone who made her pause. In seat 2A sat a woman who looked to be in her early 40s. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy blazer and cream-colored blouse. Her hair was styled perfectly, and she wore elegant pearl earrings that caught the cabin light. But something didn't sit right with Linda. In her 15 years of flying, she had developed what she called her passenger radar. She prided herself on being able to spot trouble before it started. And right now, that radar was sending her signals she couldn't ignore. The woman in 2A was scrolling through her phone, completely at ease, sipping from a water bottle she'd brought aboard. She had the confident posture of someone who belonged exactly where she was. But Linda found herself questioning that confidence. Dr. Nicole Washington had no idea she was being watched so intently. She was reviewing patient notes on her tablet, preparing for what would be one of the most important surgeries of her career. As one of the country's leading heart surgeons, she traveled frequently between hospitals, consulting on complex cases that other doctors couldn't handle. This particular trip was urgent. A 12-year-old boy in Los Angeles needed emergency heart surgery, and she was the only surgeon on the West Coast qualified to perform the specific procedure he required. Time was critical, which was why the hospital had booked her in first class. She needed to arrive rested and ready to operate. Nicole had been flying first class for over a decade. Her medical practice was successful, she lectured at universities around the world, and she had earned every luxury she could afford. She never thought twice about her right to be in first class because she had earned it through years of hard work and sacrifice. But Linda was thinking plenty. She approached slowly, her mind racing with assumptions she didn't even realize she was making. In her experience, first-class passengers usually looked a certain way, acted a certain way, and came from certain backgrounds. This woman didn't fit the mental picture Linda had built over 15 years of service. "Excuse me," Linda said, stopping, beside row 2. Her voice had that artificially sweet tone that flight attendants use when they're trying to be polite but firm. "I just need to double-check something with you." Nicole looked up from her tablet, slightly surprised but not concerned. She was used to flight attendants being extra attentive in first class. "Of course, what do you need?" "Could I see your boarding pass again?" Linda asked, though she'd already seen it when Nicole had boarded 20 minutes earlier. "I want to make sure you're in the right seat." This request struck Nicole as odd. She'd been sitting comfortably for quite a while, had stowed her bag, and was already settled in. But she reached into her purse and pulled out her boarding pass without complaint. "Here you go." Linda studied the boarding pass longer than necessary, turning it over in her hands as if looking for some hidden clue. The pass clearly showed seat 2A first class, with Nicole's name printed clearly across the top. Everything was perfectly in order, but Linda's doubts weren't satisfied. Linda said, still holding the pass. "Are you sure this is your seat? Sometimes there are mix-ups with the computer system." Now Nicole was genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, is there a problem? The boarding pass clearly shows seat 2A, and that's where I'm sitting." Other first-class passengers were starting to notice the interaction. The businessman in 1B glanced over his newspaper. The elderly couple in row 3 stopped their quiet conversation. There was something uncomfortable about the way this conversation was developing. Linda felt trapped by her own suspicions. She couldn't explain why she doubted this passenger without admitting to thoughts she didn't want to acknowledge, even to herself. So she doubled down on her procedure. Well, it's just that we've had some issues lately with passengers accidentally getting upgraded or sitting in the wrong section, Linda said, her voice getting slightly louder. First class is reserved for passengers who specifically purchase these seats or have elite status with the airline. Nicole's patience was beginning to wear thin, but she maintained her professional composure. As a surgeon, she was used to staying calm under pressure. I understand your concern, but I assure you I belong here. I'm a frequent flyer with platinum status, and I specifically purchased this first-class ticket because I have an emergency surgery to perform when I land. But Linda wasn't listening to the words. She was seeing what she expected to see rather than what was actually in front of her. Her preconceived notions were stronger than the evidence before her eyes. Surgery? Linda asked, with barely concealed skepticism. What kind of surgery? I'm a cardiac surgeon, Nicole replied, her voice remaining steady despite her growing frustration. I'm traveling to perform emergency heart surgery on a child at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The conversation was now attracting attention from passengers throughout the first-class cabin. People were turning in their seats, putting down their phones and magazines to watch what was unfolding. The tension was becoming palpable. Linda found herself in too deep to back down gracefully. Her doubt had morphed into stubborn determination to prove she was right. Do you have any identification that shows you're a doctor? This question crossed a line that Nicole hadn't expected. In all her years of travel, through countless flights and airports, no one had ever questioned her profession, her right to be somewhere, or her credibility in such a direct and public way. I'm sorry. But why exactly are you questioning my credentials? Nicole asked, her voice still controlled but with an edge that hadn't been there before. I've shown you my boarding pass, which clearly indicates this is my assigned seat. I've explained that I'm a surgeon traveling for an emergency procedure. What more do you need? The businessman in 1B finally spoke up. Excuse me, but is there some kind of problem here? This lady seems to have her boarding pass in order. Linda felt heat rising in her cheeks. She realized that her actions were being scrutinized not just by the passenger in question, but by everyone around them. But instead of stepping back and reassessing the situation, she felt compelled to justify her behavior. I'm just following airline policy, Linda said, though she knew this wasn't true. There was no policy that required her to repeatedly verify a passenger's boarding pass or question their profession. We have to make sure all passengers are in their correct seats. What Linda didn't realize was that her 7 minutes of questioning had set in motion a chain of events that would change her life forever. In the age of smartphones and social media, nothing stays private for long, and sometimes the consequences of our actions come much faster than we ever imagined possible. The atmosphere in first class had shifted completely. What started as a routine flight preparation had turned into something much more uncomfortable. Nicole could feel the eyes of every passenger in the cabin watching their exchange. The air felt thick with tension, and she realized this situation was spiraling beyond anything she had ever experienced while traveling. Linda was now standing directly in the aisle, blocking Nicole's access to the rest of the plane. Her body language had changed from polite inquiry to something that felt more like confrontation. The boarding pass was still in her hand, though she had clearly read it multiple times. I think there might be some confusion here, Linda said, her voice getting louder. Sometimes people get upgraded by mistake, or there's a computer glitch. It happens more often than you'd think. Nicole took a deep breath, drawing on the patience she had developed through years of dealing with difficult situations in the hospital. I can assure you there's no mistake. I booked this seat 3 days ago when the hospital called about the emergency surgery. I can show you the confirmation email on my phone if that would help. But Linda was already shaking her head before Nicole finished speaking. That won't be necessary. What I really need is to call my supervisor over here. He can sort this whole thing out. The businessman in seat 1B, whose name was Robert Chen, finally put down his newspaper completely. He had been flying this route for business for over 5 years and had never seen anything like this. Excuse me, he said to Linda, but this seems highly unusual. I've seen this passenger in first class on this same route multiple times. She's clearly a frequent traveler. Linda's face flushed red. Having another passenger challenge her judgment made her feel even more defensive. Sir, I appreciate your concern, but I need to handle this according to airline policy. This is a security matter now. Security matter? Nicole asked, her voice rising slightly for the first time. You're calling this a security matter? I'm a paying passenger with a valid ticket, sitting in my assigned seat. The elderly woman in row 3, Mrs. Betty Patterson, who had been flying for decades, leaned forward. Young lady, she said to Linda, I've been watching this whole thing, and I have to say this doesn't seem right. This woman has done nothing wrong that I can see. More passengers were now actively watching and listening. Some had put away their books and phones entirely. A few people in the rows behind first class had started to peer over their seats to see what was happening. The entire front section of the plane was focused on this confrontation. Linda felt cornered. She had expected the situation to resolve quickly, with the passenger simply moving to a different seat or admitting to some mistake. Instead, she was facing opposition from multiple directions, and her authority was being questioned publicly. I'm going to call Mr. Rodriguez over, Linda announced, reaching for her communication device. He's the senior flight attendant and he can handle this properly. Tony Rodriguez had been working flights for 12 years. He was in the galley, preparing for takeoff when he heard his name called over the intercom. He knew Linda well. They had worked together dozens of times. She was usually calm and professional, so hearing stress in her voice concerned him. As he walked toward first class, he could see a crowd of passengers all looking in the same direction. This was never a good sign. Passenger disputes were one of the most challenging parts of his job, especially when they happened before takeoff. What seems to be the problem here? Tony asked as he approached Linda and Nicole. This passenger is sitting in first class, but I don't think she belongs here, Linda said quickly. I've asked to see her boarding pass multiple times, and something just doesn't feel right about the situation. Tony looked at Nicole, who was still sitting calmly in her seat, though he could see the strain in her expression. Ma'am, could you show me your boarding pass? Nicole handed it over without comment. Tony looked at it for about 10 seconds, much less time than Linda had spent examining it. This looks perfectly fine to me, he said. Seat 2A, first class, everything appears to be in order. But don't you think we should double-check? Linda pressed. Maybe call the gate agent to confirm? Tony was starting to understand what was really happening here, and it made him deeply uncomfortable. He had seen situations like this before, though never quite so blatant. Linda, the boarding pass is valid. This passenger has every right to be in this seat. Are you sure? Linda asked, as if Tony couldn't read a simple boarding pass. Because I really think there might be an issue here. Robert Chen, who had been listening to the entire exchange, finally stood up. This is absolutely ridiculous, he said loudly enough for half the plane to hear. I've seen this woman on this flight route multiple times over the past 2 years. She's always in first class, she's always professional and quiet, and she clearly belongs here. This is harassment, pure and simple. His words hung in the air like a challenge. Other passengers began murmuring their agreement. Someone in row 4 said, He's right. This is getting out of hand. Another voice added, Just let the woman fly in peace. Nicole felt a mix of emotions washing over her. Part of her was grateful for the support from fellow passengers, but part of her was deeply hurt that she needed defending at all. In all her years of professional success, all her achievements, in medicine, all the lives she had saved, she had never imagined being publicly questioned about her right to sit in a seat she had purchased. I think, Nicole said, her voice steady but with clear emotion underneath, that everyone can see my boarding pass is valid. I've been nothing but cooperative. I've explained that I'm traveling for an emergency surgery that could save a child's life. What more do you need from me? The question hung in the air because everyone in first class knew the answer, even if Linda wouldn't admit it to herself. This had nothing to do with boarding passes or airline policies or computer glitches. This was about assumptions and prejudices that ran deeper than professional protocols. Tony realized he needed to take control of the situation before it got any worse. Linda, I think we need to step back and let this passenger travel in peace. Her documentation is completely valid. But Linda had gone too far to back down gracefully now. I just think we should be extra careful. You can never be too sure about these things. These things? Robert Chen repeated, his voice sharp. What exactly do you mean by these things? The question echoed through the cabin, and suddenly everyone understood exactly what was happening. The uncomfortable truth was now out in the open, hanging between them like a toxic cloud. Nicole closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of a lifetime of subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination settling on her shoulders. She had hoped that her professional success, her education, her achievements would protect her from moments like this. But here she was, being publicly humiliated on an airplane, her credentials questioned, her right to occupy space challenged. When she opened her eyes, she saw that several passengers had their phones out. In the age of social media, nothing stayed private anymore. This moment, this injustice, was about to become much bigger than just an awkward conversation on a plane. The next few minutes would change everything. The tension in the cabin had reached a breaking point. Multiple passengers were now openly staring, some with their phones discreetly positioned to record what was happening. The murmur of conversations had grown louder, and it was clear that word of the confrontation was spreading throughout the plane. Captain Mike Stevens had been going through his pre-flight checklist in the cockpit when his co-pilot mentioned hearing some kind of disturbance in the cabin. After 23 years of flying commercial aircraft, Mike had learned that passenger disputes could delay flights and create serious problems if not handled quickly. "I better go see what's happening," he told his co-pilot. "We're supposed to push back in 10 minutes. As Mike walked through the first-class cabin, he immediately sensed the uncomfortable atmosphere. Passengers were turned in their seats, focused on something happening in row 2. Tony Rodriguez was standing in the aisle looking stressed, and Linda was still hovering near the same passenger she'd been questioning for several minutes now. But when Mike saw who was sitting in seat 2A, his entire expression changed. His face lit up with genuine surprise and recognition, and he broke into a warm smile that was completely at odds with the tense situation around him. "Dr. Washington," he called out, his voice filled with warmth and respect. "I can't believe it's you." Nicole looked up, initially confused by this unexpected greeting from the captain. She didn't immediately recognize him, which wasn't surprising given how many people she encountered in her professional life. "I'm sorry," she said politely. "Do we know each other?" Mike's smile grew even wider as he approached her seat. "You probably don't remember me, but you saved my daughter's life 2 years ago. Katie Stevens. She was 8 years old when she came into your hospital with a heart defect. You performed emergency surgery on her when 3 other doctors said it was too risky to attempt." The entire cabin fell silent. Even the passengers in economy who had been straining to hear what was happening seemed to quiet down. This was not the turn anyone had expected the conversation to take. Nicole's face softened as the memory came back to her. Katie Stevens. Yes, I remember her. She had a complex congenital heart defect. How is she doing now? She's perfect, Mike said, his voice thick with emotion. She's 10 years old now, playing soccer, getting straight A's in school. You gave her a complete life. You gave our whole family our daughter back. Linda stood frozen, watching this exchange with growing horror as she began to understand the magnitude of her mistake. This wasn't just any passenger she had been questioning. This was someone who literally saved lives for a living. Dr. Washington is one of the country's most respected cardiac surgeons, Mike continued, addressing not just Linda, but the entire cabin. She's operated on patients from all over the world. Hospitals fly her in for cases that no one else can handle. Robert Chen, who had been defending Nicole throughout the confrontation, shook his head in disgust. So let me get this straight, he said loudly. We've been sitting here watching a flight attendant harass a world-renowned heart surgeon who saves children's lives? The businessman's words cut through the cabin like a knife. Several passengers made sounds of disapproval and disbelief. Someone in row 4 said, "This is unbelievable." Another voice added, "Absolutely shameful." Mike turned to Linda with a stern expression that showed his years of command authority. "Is there some reason you've been questioning Dr. Washington's right to be in first class?" Linda felt like the floor was falling out from under her. Every assumption she had made, every doubt she had expressed, was now being exposed as completely unfounded and embarrassing. I was just following protocol, she stammered. What protocol? Mike asked. The protocol that requires you to repeatedly verify the boarding pass of a passenger who has done nothing wrong? The protocol that questions a paying customer's right to sit in a seat they purchased? Tony Rodriguez stepped forward, clearly trying to salvage the situation. Captain, I think there may have been some miscommunication here. Dr. Washington's boarding pass is completely valid, and she's been nothing but cooperative throughout this entire interaction. Miscommunication? Robert Chen stood up again, his voice rising. This wasn't miscommunication. This was profiling, pure and simple. I've been watching this whole thing unfold, and it's been obvious from the beginning what was really happening here. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman in row 3, nodded vigorously. That young man is absolutely right. I've been flying for 40 years and I've never seen anything like this. This poor woman has been treated terribly. Nicole sat quietly through all of this, her professional composure intact, but her emotions clearly strained. She had faced discrimination before in her career, subtle comments about her qualifications, assumptions about her abilities, moments when she had to prove herself more than her colleagues did. But never had it been so public, so blatant, so humiliating. Dr. Washington, Mike said, turning back to her with genuine concern, I want to personally apologize for what you've experienced on our aircraft today. This is completely unacceptable, and it does not represent the values of our airline or our crew. Thank you, Captain, Nicole said quietly. I appreciate that. Mike wasn't finished. He turned to address the entire first-class cabin. I want everyone to know that Dr. Washington is not just any passenger. She's someone who dedicates her life to saving others. She's traveling today to perform emergency surgery on a child in Los Angeles. She should be treated with the utmost respect, not subjected to questioning and harassment. The captain's words seemed to hang in the air as the full impact of the situation settled on everyone present. This wasn't just about one passenger being treated poorly. This was about a genuine hero being publicly humiliated while on her way to save a child's life. A woman in row 5 started clapping. Then Robert Chen joined in. Within seconds, nearly every passenger in first class was applauding Dr. Washington. The sound echoed through the cabin, reaching passengers in economy who began clapping too, even though many of them didn't fully understand what was happening. Nicole felt tears welling up in her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming mix of emotions she was experiencing. The support from strangers, the recognition from the captain, the vindication after being questioned and doubted. It was almost too much to process. But even as the applause died down, the damage was already spreading beyond the confines of the aircraft. Several passengers had been recording the interaction on their phones. The moment when Captain Stevens recognized and praised Dr. Washington had been captured from multiple angles. The contrast between Linda's harassment and Mike's respectful recognition was stark and powerful. A young woman in row 6 had been live-streaming parts of the confrontation on social media. Her followers were already sharing the video, adding their own commentary about what they were witnessing. The hashtags were starting to form. Respect in the skies. First-class discrimination. Hero treated poorly. Linda realized that her actions had been witnessed and recorded by dozens of people. In the age of viral videos and social media accountability, there was no way to take back what had happened or control how the story would be told. Tony Rodriguez approached Linda quietly. We need to talk after we get airborne, he said in a low voice. This situation is going to require some serious explanation. As the crew prepared for takeoff, the atmosphere in the cabin remained charged with emotion. Dr. Washington had been vindicated and supported, but the underlying questions about why she had been targeted in the first place lingered in everyone's minds. The flight to Los Angeles would take 5 hours, but the consequences of what had happened in these few minutes would last much longer than that. The flight to Los Angeles felt longer than usual for everyone involved. While most passengers settled into their routines of reading, sleeping, or watching movies, the atmosphere in first class remained tense. Linda spent the entire flight avoiding, eye contact with Dr. Washington and the other passengers who had witnessed her behavior. About 2 hours into the flight, Linda's phone started buzzing with notifications. At first she ignored them, thinking it was just her usual social media updates. But the buzzing didn't stop. In fact, it seemed to be getting more frequent and insistent. During a quiet moment, she checked her phone and felt her heart sink. Someone had tagged her in a video that was spreading rapidly across social media platforms. The video showed her questioning Dr. Washington, followed by Captain Stevens's passionate defense of the surgeon. The comments section was exploding with reactions, and none of them were supportive of Linda's actions. Flight attendant harasses world-famous heart surgeon, read one headline that had been shared thousands of times. Watch this doctor get disrespected while traveling to save a child's life, said another post that was going viral on multiple platforms. Linda's hands shook as she scrolled through the comments. People were calling her behavior disgusting, racist, and completely unprofessional. Some comments were sharing the video with their own followers, adding their own angry commentary about discrimination and prejudice. What made it worse was that several passengers had filmed the incident from different angles. There was no way to deny what had happened or claim the videos were taken out of context. Her questioning of Dr. Washington was captured clearly, along with the patient way the doctor had responded and the eventual revelation of her important work. Robert Chen, who was sitting just a few rows away, noticed Linda's distressed expression. He had seen her checking her phone repeatedly and could guess what she was discovering. As someone who worked in public relations, he understood how quickly situations like this could spiral out of control in the digital age. Meanwhile, Dr. Washington was trying to focus on her upcoming surgery. She had downloaded the patient's medical files and was reviewing the complex procedure she would need to perform. The 12-year-old boy waiting for her in Los Angeles had a rare heart condition that required precise surgical intervention. She couldn't let the morning's events distract her from what mattered most, but even as she tried to concentrate on her medical preparations, her own phone was receiving notifications. Colleagues from around the country were reaching out, having seen the videos and wanting to express their support. Medical associations were sharing the story, highlighting how even respected professionals faced discrimination during routine activities. Dr. Patricia Williams, the head of cardiology at Johns Hopkins, had sent a message saying, "Nicole, I saw what happened on your flight. This is absolutely unacceptable. You have the support of the entire medical community." Dr. James Kim from Stanford Medical Center wrote, "The way you were treated today is a disgrace. You've saved countless lives, and you deserve nothing but respect." The messages kept coming from doctors, nurses, hospital administrators, and medical students who had heard about the incident. What had started as a humiliating personal experience was becoming a rallying point for healthcare professionals who had faced similar treatment. As the plane descended toward Los Angeles, Linda realized the full scope of what was happening. Her supervisor, Tony Rodriguez, had been receiving messages from airline management throughout the flight. The company's social media team was already dealing with hundreds of angry comments and demands for accountability. The airline's customer service department was being flooded with calls from people who had seen the videos. Passengers were threatening to cancel their frequent flyer memberships and switch to other airlines. Travel bloggers were writing articles about the incident, and news outlets were starting to pick up the story. Linda's personal social media accounts had been discovered by internet users who were sharing her information and calling for consequences. Her Facebook profile, which she had thought was private, was being screenshotted and shared. People were finding her LinkedIn profile and leaving negative reviews about her professional conduct. The young woman in row 6, who had live-streamed parts of the confrontation, had gained thousands of new followers as her video continued to spread. She was receiving messages from news reporters asking for interviews about what she had witnessed. "I couldn't believe what I was seeing," she had written in her post. This amazing doctor who saves children's lives was being treated like she didn't belong in first class. It was heartbreaking to watch. Her video had been shared by several celebrities and public figures, amplifying its reach even further. A famous actress had reposted it with the comment, "This is exactly why we still need to talk about discrimination." This woman is a hero, and she was treated terribly. A prominent civil rights organization had also shared the video, using it as an example of how bias and prejudice affected people in all walks of life, even successful professionals who had achieved the highest levels in their fields. As the plane prepared for landing, Captain Stevens made an announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we prepare for our arrival in Los Angeles, I want to remind everyone that our airline is committed to treating all passengers with dignity and respect. We have zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind." His words were clearly directed at the morning's events, and everyone in first class understood the message. Linda felt like everyone on the plane was looking at her, even though most passengers in economy had no idea who she was or what had happened. Dr. Washington gathered her belongings as the plane taxied to the gate. She had received a message from the hospital confirming that her young patient was stable and ready for surgery. Despite the morning's ordeal, she was focused on the life-saving work ahead of her. As passengers began to disembark, several people approached Dr. Washington to express their support and admiration. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman from row 3, stopped to shake her hand. "Doctor, I want you to know that what happened today was wrong," she said. "But I also want you to know that you handled it with such grace and dignity. You're a credit to your profession." Robert Chen also approached her before leaving the plane. "Dr. Washington, I work in communications, and I want you to know that this story is going to have a big impact. What happened to you today is going to start important conversations about how we treat people." Linda remained in her seat until most of the passengers had left the plane. She was dreading the conversation she knew was coming with her supervisors. Tony Rodriguez had already told her that management wanted to speak with her immediately upon landing. As she finally stood to leave the aircraft, Linda realized that her 15-year career was likely over. The videos circulating online showed her behavior clearly, and there was no way to explain away what had happened. She had let her assumptions and biases cloud her judgment, and now she was facing the consequences. The story was far from over. In fact, as the passengers dispersed into LAX airport, the real impact was just beginning. The videos would continue to spread, reaching millions of people around the world. News outlets would pick up the story, creating a national conversation about discrimination and respect. Dr. Washington headed to the hospital to save a child's life, just as she had planned. But Linda's life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined when she started her shift that morning. By the time the sun set in Los Angeles, the whole world would know what had happened on Flight 447. Within 24 hours of Flight 447's landing, the incident had exploded across every major news platform and social media site in the country. The hashtag, #flight discrimination, was trending worldwide, with millions of people sharing their thoughts about what had happened in first class that Tuesday morning. Linda Harper woke up the next day to find her entire life turned upside down. Her phone had been ringing constantly since 6 in the morning. Reporters, her airline supervisors, even her neighbors wanting to know if she was that flight attendant from the viral video. She had stopped answering calls hours ago, but the voicemails kept piling up. The meeting with airline management had gone exactly as she had feared. Her supervisor, Tony Rodriguez, had tried to defend her, explaining that she was usually professional and had never caused problems before. But the executives weren't interested in hearing explanations. The videos were clear, the public backlash was severe, and the company's reputation was being damaged by the hour. "Linda, we have no choice," the regional manager had told her during their emergency meeting. "The video speaks for itself. You repeatedly questioned a passenger's right to be in first class despite having valid documentation. This violates our anti-discrimination policies and our basic standards of customer service." She had been terminated immediately. 15 years of service, hundreds of flights, thousands of passengers served professionally. None of it mattered. Now, her career in aviation was over, and everyone in the industry would know why. The termination was just the beginning of Linda's problems. The airline had released a public statement condemning her actions and announcing her dismissal. The statement was shared widely, ensuring that her name and face were now permanently associated with the incident. Her personal life was falling apart just as quickly as her professional one. Her husband, Kevin, had been supportive at first, telling her that people would forget about the incident in a few days. But as the story continued to spread and their phone kept ringing with angry calls, his patience was wearing thin. "Linda, I can't even go to work without people asking me about this," he said during a heated argument. "My coworkers are looking at me differently. Our neighbors are talking. This isn't going away." Their teenage daughter was having an even harder time. Kids at school had seen the videos and were making comments about her mother being the racist flight attendant. Social media was particularly brutal for teenagers, and the family name was now associated with one of the most talked about discrimination incidents of the year. Meanwhile, Dr. Nicole Washington had successfully performed the emergency surgery on the young boy in Los Angeles. The procedure had taken 8 hours, but the child was expected to make a full recovery. Despite everything that had happened on the flight, she had maintained her focus and professionalism when it mattered most. But the incident had affected her more than she initially realized. As a successful professional who had worked hard to earn respect in her field, being publicly questioned and humiliated had brought back memories of every subtle slight she had experienced throughout her career. The outpouring of support from the medical community had been overwhelming. Hospitals across the country had reached out to express their admiration for how she handled the situation. Medical schools were inviting her to speak about professionalism and dignity in the face of adversity. However, Dr. Washington was most moved by the messages from young medical students, particularly those from minority backgrounds who said her grace under pressure had inspired them to continue pursuing their dreams, despite facing similar challenges. "Dr. Washington, seeing how you handled that situation with such dignity gives me hope that I can succeed in medicine too," wrote one student. "Thank you for showing us how to respond to discrimination with strength and class." The airline industry was also facing broader consequences from the incident. Other airlines were quickly reviewing their customer service policies and implementing additional training programs to prevent similar situations. The incident had become a case study in how not to treat passengers and how quickly bad behavior could destroy careers and damage companies. Flight attendant unions were distancing themselves from Linda's actions while calling for better training to help crew members recognize and address their own unconscious biases. Many flight attendants were speaking out publicly, saying that Linda's behavior didn't represent the professionalism they strived for in their work. Robert Chen, the businessman who had defended Dr. Washington during the flight, had been contacted by several news outlets for interviews. He had become an unexpected voice in the conversation about bystander intervention and standing up for what's right. "I couldn't just sit there and watch someone be treated unfairly," he told a reporter. "It didn't matter that I didn't know Dr. Washington personally. What mattered was that a fellow human being was being disrespected for no good reason." His comments were widely shared and praised, with many people saying that more passengers should follow his example of speaking up when they witness discrimination. Captain Mike Stevens had also been affected by the incident. The airline had commended him for his professional handling of the situation and his recognition of Dr. Washington's important work. But Mike was troubled by the fact that the incident had happened on his aircraft under his command. He had reached out to Dr. Washington personally to apologize again and to thank her for the life-saving work she did. He also shared updates about his daughter Katie, whose successful recovery continued to remind him daily of Dr. Washington's skill and dedication. 6 months after the incident, the long-term consequences were still unfolding. Linda had been unable to find work in the airline industry or any customer service role. The viral video appeared in background checks and online searches of her name, making it nearly impossible for her to rebuild her career. Her marriage had ended in divorce, and she had been forced to move in with her sister while she figured out how to support herself. The incident had cost her not just her job, but her financial stability, her marriage, and her reputation in the community where she had lived for over a decade. Dr. Washington, on the other hand, had used the platform created by the incident to advocate for better treatment of all passengers and increased awareness about unconscious bias. She had partnered with the airline to develop new training programs and had spoken at conferences about dignity and respect in professional settings. The young patient she had traveled to save had made a complete recovery and was now a healthy, active child. Dr. Washington kept in touch with his family, and they often sent her updates about his progress. Knowing that she had been able to save his life despite the difficulties of that day remained her greatest source of satisfaction from the entire experience. The incident had also led to meaningful changes in the airline industry. New policies were implemented requiring additional justification for questioning passengers' documentation, and crew members received enhanced training about unconscious bias and discrimination. Several other passengers from Flight 447 had stayed in touch with Dr. Washington, including Mrs. Patterson, who sent her holiday cards, and Robert Chen, who had become an advocate for passenger rights and respectful treatment. The story of Flight 447 became more than just a viral video or a news story. It became a reminder that our actions have consequences, that treating people with dignity matters, and that standing up for what's right can make a real difference. Linda's 7 minutes of poor judgment had cost her everything she had worked for, while Dr. Washington's grace and professionalism had inspired millions of people around the world. The contrast between their two paths served as a powerful lesson about the choices we make and the kind of people we choose to be. In the end, the incident proved that respect and dignity aren't luxuries. They're necessities that every person deserves, regardless of where they're sitting or what they look like.